Well, welcome everybody to this latest in the series of Green Live discussion sessions. We've been holding these every Friday with Scottish Greens at 2 p.m. And my name is Mark Ruskell. I'm MSP for Mid Scotland and Fife for Scottish Greens, and also a spokesperson on environment and climate. And I'm absolutely delighted to be joined in discussion this afternoon with Clare Bailey, MLA, leader of the Green Party of Northern Ireland, and co-leader of the Green Party of England and Wales, Jonathan Bartley. And we're going to be discussing the green recovery and what we can do to ensure that we build back better during these times. As I said, this is part of a series of Green Live sessions. We've done sessions with students, climate strikers, public health. We're going to be doing another one next week on transport. But today, it's a green recovery. So perhaps could I just start with yourself, Clare? I mean, firstly, it's really great to see you back in Stormont again, having been furloughed for the best part of 3 years. But how's lockdown been for you? What are your reflections as we start to come out of this period?
Thanks, it's great to be here, and thank you so much for the invite and for having me along today. Always love speaking to the Scottish Greens. But you're right, I was first elected, I suppose, in 2016, and it was only a matter of months later then that the executive in Northern Ireland collapsed. So yes, I have been furloughed for almost 3.5 years, I suppose, and back into it again. But on a personal level, I'm actually really enjoying lockdown. The workload is really, really busy, and that's okay. And trying to find the time to fit everything in, but learning those new ways of being, having the ability to be able to stand back and look at how my time and my resource were being used before and how I feel that they are much better at the minute has been really, really good. So my children are grown up, they're in their early 20s now, but I have both of them back in the house. So we have just that wee unit back in again, which is just great, speaking as a mum, having them back in the house, but also looking at that quality of family life and what is important and what needs done during the day. You know, we can get up in the morning and we can see what have we got, what do we need, who needs to go shopping, nobody, who's doing the cooking. The weather's been amazing. We've also got the garden. So I understand that I have that space, and I have my children and my family about me again. So on that personal level, we have just been doing things very, very differently, and not being out and about, not having to get up and leave the house at 7 or 8 in the morning and not coming back until, sometimes 9 or 10 at night, and you come home tired, although you've had a really busy day. I'm having those busy days at home now and been able to incorporate that much better into my family life and reprioritizing, I suppose, how we live together. So in that context, it's been good.
Yeah, it must be really nice having your kids back home again as well, and bring back memories from the past and good times. Jonathan, how's it been for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit like Claire. I've enjoyed most of it. I co-parent, so I have my children 1 week out of every 2, and my eldest is now 21, just finished university. Son is turning 18, my youngest is turning 16, so they're all kind of grown up now. And it's been great to spend some time with them. I think like you, Claire, the work-life balance really tough. I mean, I just don't know where the hours in the day are going. The days seem shorter. So much going on. My son is a wheelchair user, has quite significant support needs, care needs, and so we've had to have personal assistants, as would normally be the case, coming in and going out as 2 personal assistants. So they've been challenging circumstances over PPE, personally, and making sure that everyone's protected, and balancing that around the need to lock down and isolate when necessary. I also have a couple of people who live with me in the house as lodgers, so that's been a challenge. One of them did get, we think, coronavirus, but it was back in the day when there wasn't ready testing available. So we all kind of had to self-isolate for a while, the whole household. We were trying to balance everything that comes with that. We don't think anyone else got it, although guess some of us may be asymptomatic. But the workload, I mean, it's just, might have expected to be a little bit less, but it just hasn't been like that. And I lead the opposition on land of council here where I live. So I'm doing a lot at the local level as well as keeping an eye on the national picture. So it's a real juggling act between kind of two lots of work and the domestic situation, and then trying to fit in time to run and jog and get some exercise. So I've been working out a bit, trying to get my lockdown body.
Yeah, I'm working on that as well. It's a bit of a struggle, I think, given the amount of home baking. Yeah.
You see the alcohol cabinet behind me is quite replenished.
Yeah, I've got some interesting backgrounds here. It's good to see no books. The sewing machine isn't mine, but yeah, I mean, the same for me actually. It's been a really, really busy time, and I think it is a struggle. I mean, I've got school-age children. I've got a primary school-age son, and one who's in high school, and my wife's a teacher. But yeah, homeschooling is really hard, and I think, trying to get that right balance between doing the work and doing the work at home as well, to keep the house running with your partner is a struggle at times. But yeah, it's really made me sort of think how lucky I am, really. I'm in a house which is secure. We've got a mortgage on the house. We've got a small garden, which is great. We've got some hens in the garden, and it's been a nice space to go into when we've all been feeling a bit stressed. But there are many people who don't have that, and when I look at my email inbox and I see some of the difficulties people are having, people in insecure accommodation or facing eviction or whatever, it really does bring it home that we're very lucky in having this kind of security around us, really. So yeah, okay. Well, should we perhaps move on to then just having a chat about what your parties have been doing in lockdown? I mean, Jonathan, you were kicking off there with some of the work that you've been doing in the council. What else have Greens and Green Party of England Wales been doing during this time? What have been your priorities?
So much. I think my internet might be dropping out a bit, so let me know if I'm breaking up. I guess the kind of 6 areas where we've been focusing, just 6. I mean, the first of all has been kind of holding the government to account. There seems to be a real dearth of good opposition at the moment. So, just this week, letters to government about a new body responsible for local lockdowns, joint biosecurity centre. What's it all about? Who's on it? What background do they have? How is it going to operate? The Prime Minister misleading the Select Committee yesterday about care homes, drawing the evidence for that and pointing out where things don't match up. Letters to the Cabinet Secretary at the beginning of the week about Dominic Cummings breaching the Special Advisor's Code of Conduct. So a constant kind of holding the government to account, where I think a lot of the other parties aren't doing it. Second area is putting forward ideas, proposals such as isolating care homes. This whole care home thing again has blown up in the last 24 hours. On the 14th of April, we put forward proposals ahead of the Public Health England proposals, which we learned about last night, that care homes should quarantine, that staff should move in. We put in forward proposals for community shielding a number of weeks ago, and of course pushing very, very hard basic income. So that whole area of ideas. Third area, amplifying the voices of NGOs, those who are falling through the cracks, those with no recourse to public funds, those in detention centres, the people who have been forgotten about, the 2 million who are still shielding. The Trussell Trust, as they've drawn attention to the use of food banks, have been amplifying that. The Independent Workers Union over the rights for workers in the gig economy and how workers are being laid off there. So that whole area of amplification of the NGOs and those who are falling through the net. Sounding the alarm about the democratic deficit has been another big area. Both at we've seen it at the national level, hugely in the last week, but also at the local level. We've seen a lot of local authorities making a power grab under emergency powers, changing their constitutions, cutting out opposition parties, making decisions very, very rapidly, and without proper scrutiny, those decisions tend to be substandard and not always good for local people. But also, right at the European level, met with other European Green Party leaders, and it's clear that there's a national picture across Europe where some governments are using this emergency situation to, again, centralise power. So that's the fourth area, the democratic deficit. The fifth area, probably a lot of work with our local councillors to identify issues at the local level. recognising that there's some very tangible changes we can all be pushing for at the local level, pavement widening, maintaining bans on evictions from council housing, social housing, but also looking at how we improve the way decisions are made, expanding the role of the citizens' assemblies. This wonderful outpouring of mutual aid and communities coming together, I think, means we've got new opportunities for doing local democracy. And then, of course, the last area that we're going to talk about, so I won't go into detail, the Green New Deal, which we're going to really enjoy discussing.
Yeah, great. Yeah, it feels very familiar, those areas of work. Claire.
Yeah, absolutely sound very familiar, but I suppose here in Northern Ireland, we're no strangers to political crises, I suppose. So we have two MLAs up at Stormont, myself and Rachel Woods in North Down. And in terms of the assembly work that's going on, obviously things are coming thick and fast, and the speed that legislation and change is coming forward, financial packages, allocations. We only had our executive restored in January, so ministers are just in place since then, and then COVID came a few weeks later, and we're all into social distancing and lockdown, but really trying to keep an eye on the raft of legislation that's coming through to try and help out over COVID, is a full-time job on its own, I suppose, and then working through committees. So I'm on the Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs Committee, it's sort of DEFRA at Westminster and DERA here in Northern Ireland. So we have a lot of Brexit bills coming through. So the agriculture bill, for example, which is just going through Westminster at the minute, and legislative consent being sought from the devolved regions. We've also got the environment bill, and we're writing up a report on that one at the minute. We've got the fisheries bill also. So there's huge pieces of very, very significant and game-changing legislation coming through there as well. Obviously Brexit's on the agenda, and we are going to be the only sort of area within the UK to have a land border with the EU, and how we try to manage that north-south is also going on. We are an all-island party as well, so in the south they had phenomenal election results recently as well, where they returned 12 TDs, and I'm now taking part in government formation talks in the south, so that's all been going on in the background too. So that's the bigger sort of picture. Last year, we had local elections where the Greens made really significant breakthroughs, and we now have councillors in 3 council areas. And I suppose more importantly, we have a block of 4 councillors in Belfast City Council, which was just phenomenal, and they are doing absolutely amazing work. We have 3 up North Down and 1 in Castlereagh Lisburn Council, so they all sort of corridor each other. So learning how to maximise the impact that we have at that local level as well, and I couldn't be prouder than of our councillors and the work that they have been doing since COVID has hit. They've been absolutely phenomenal and really proven that they're connected to their communities and at that grassroots level. So I've been running about making sure that, for example, food banks and supplies are getting out to those who actually need them, and monitoring where they're going, but they're really rolling their sleeves up. Some of our councillors have set up soup kitchens, got them up and going, and they're now, well established, and with hundreds of volunteers coming on board and delivering soup to those who have either had to cocoon or isolate and can't get out and about. So all that's been happening as well, but it's been phenomenal to have that level of team support within our own party, which is something quite new because we're still breaking that type of ground. But it has also been challenging in how we keep those conversations going, how we keep connected as a party, we keep our agenda there, that we liaise between each other, that we know what's happening at council, how it affects work at the assembly, and vice versa. So that's still in flux, and I imagine it will be. It'll be a never-changing situation as we keep going. And of course, as Jonathan has said, and is central to all of us, working out how we plan for post-COVID recovery. How do we build back better? How do we embed a just transition and a Green New Deal at the heart of how we come out of this? Because no matter how bad COVID is and how devastating the impact and the loss of life that it has caused, we're set to see much more serious impacts with the climate breakdown that is upon us. And while it might be moving at a much slower pace, the devastation will be much greater. So we can't ignore one over the other. We have an opportunity at the minute to really have a look at how we do business, how we are as individuals, how we are as communities, and what we need from our political and elected leadership. So absolutely working on a localised Green New Deal manifesto and how we can campaign at different levels to bring that forward.
Yeah, I mean, it's been an incredibly busy time, and yeah, I mean, our council's been working really, really hard. It's interesting you're talking about food work. Alistair Tolmash, who's a councillor in Stirling, where I live, has been setting up a food hub in one of the towns in the area. And I know other green councils across Scotland are doing incredible work, working on space for distancing measures, putting in pop-up cycle lanes and really working hard for their communities. I think it's a good time for us all to pull together as one green family and work together on these issues. We've been really busy. Alison Johnston, our health spokesperson in the Scottish Parliament, has been really pushing the Scottish Government hard on the lack of a comprehensive testing facility in Scotland. And I think for some time we were actually leading on this topic in Scotland. We were very much leading the debate and getting a lot of buy-in from public health professionals for our plans for this as well, which was good. We had a really busy time at the start of lockdown. So we had a lot of constituents get in touch. Coming into my inbox were concerns from students who were being faced with being charged for their rents, even though they couldn't remain at university anymore and had left their accommodation. We had similar situations with nurseries charging families for nursery places which they couldn't actually use during lockdown. And supermarket workers. There was a supermarket chain that was forcing employees to use their annual leave if they were going into self-isolation or time off in lieu. So there's a lot of kind of advocacy work on behalf of constituents coming forward, but then some of that work then fed into the work we were doing on the 2 pieces of COVID legislation that have been going through the Scottish Parliament. So my colleague Andy Whiteman was working hard to try and get some changes that will support tenants to prevent evictions during this time, and also a rent cap across Scotland. We weren't successful unfortunately in persuading the SNP government of that, but it's an ongoing issue, which I think the COVID crisis just brings into sharp relief. We also got some changes on FOI. The first COVID bill introduced quite draconian changes, rolling back FOI regulations and rights in Scotland. We got those reinstated. Patrick Harvey had an amendment which outlawed bailouts for tax avoiding companies. So very much following on from what the Welsh Parliament established, but we managed to get some progress on that. And I got a couple of amendments through in the bill as well on cleaner cities. So pushing the Scottish Government to continue the rollout of low emission zones, but also I got an amendment through which ensured that some of these pop-up cycle lanes and walkways and things that are being pushed through right now as emergency measures can stay in place for a bit longer. So hopefully we can make them permanent changes to our towns and cities. So yeah, there's been a lot of work to do and a lot of parliamentary work, and it's been tricky at times trying to do all of that remotely. We've had remote voting in the Scottish Parliament, but yeah, we've managed to focus in on a legislative agenda as well and get some change for communities, which has been great. Great times marching on. We're having a good chat here, but I'd like us to sort of move on to green recovery and really how we build back better. I mean, my sense is that this was a difficult conversation to have maybe a couple of months ago, that nobody wanted to be seen to be opportunistic, but there are clearly opportunities now about how we build back better. And we've got an opportunity to really fight for the future that the planet desperately needs. And I think what's been incredible, and you mentioned it earlier on, Jonathan, about universal basic income, rising to the top of the agenda now. For decades we've been talking about the importance of this, but it's now, everybody's now talking about it. There's an opportunity to rethink economic growth, to talk about what livable cities actually mean. I think everybody's becoming much more community-minded now, as they're spending more time in their communities and thinking about that. How we regenerate nature and how we make a Green New Deal, relevant for people. How do we grow new jobs in the economy? Because there's going to be a desperate need for jobs coming forward. So you spoke a little bit about what some of those priorities are, but perhaps we could come back in on that. What are your immediate priorities for ensuring that we can build back better across these islands in the months to come? Claire, do you want to come back in on that?
Yeah, we're sort of looking around 4 key themes that hopefully just go into a lot of the issues that you're looking at or were mentioned already. Things about reorganizing mobility. How I think lockdown has really shone a light on how we move about our towns and our cities, how we go about our daily lives. Air pollution is a big issue that we have been campaigning on long and hard. And when we see the green recovery, I suppose that nature is not taking its time to recover itself. You know, we've seen within a matter of weeks how that has happened. So we're looking at issues of public transport. How do we move about? And again, it's going into Belfast is one of the most car-dependent cities in the UK for all the size of us and our population. Our public transport system is not good. It's just not right across Northern Ireland, not just in the city. So even our train network is just a very small, limited network that goes around the east coast. So it doesn't go inland, it doesn't go over to the west, things like that. How do we join up our towns, our cities, our villages? Who needs to be moving where? And also flights and air travel. We had Flybe who went bust before the lockdown as well, and our airports really lobbying to try and get a lot of work done there. But how do we move? We would really like to see big moves in terms of, Mark, you mentioned bicycles, walking and sustainable transport as well, and doing a reverse pathways. So when we think that footpaths are for pedestrians, and when we look at our towns and our cities, and they're still dominated by roads, so there is no or very little pedestrianisation happening there. So there's a big movement, a lot of people having conversations about how we do that. Belfast City Council in particular starting to look at areas within our city to become pedestrianised, and they started work there, but we would like to see that really rolled out much bigger. But also looking at the naturalisation of our spaces. We have very few green spaces. I know that we're known as the Emerald Isle, but when we actually look at where that green is, it's not in all the right places perhaps. We have huge deforestation that has happened, so there is a big impetus to try and plant 1 million trees over the next few years, for example, but that goes much deeper as well. But our cities, Belfast, again, Belfast centric here because that's where I am, but Belfast, we know that 1/3 of our population here are young people, but yet when we look at our cities, there is nowhere for them. There is no green space, there is no what I call hanging out space, there's nowhere to just go and be and allow things to generate themselves. It's all very commercialized, it's very developer driven, and I think that we need to try and use the opportunities that we have now to break that mentality and to force our councils and our legislators and our policy makers, our civil service, to really break this lack of imagination in how we can make these changes, to stop just continuing the cycle and the system, and revive our communities, give communities the power to start decentralising those. And I always think that food is a really great leveller. So one of our ministers, our Minister of Communities, is speaking good language at the minute in particular in terms of community wealth building, for example, and to try and, you know, encourage cooperatives and community initiatives and productivity, because that level of community productivity really leads to community resilience, which is something I think that we've all become very aware is seriously lacking. The other area is obviously housing and the decommodification of housing and making sure that people have secure housing, that their human rights are upheld here. And while we've seen government moves to give mortgage holidays, we have not seen the same happen for renting holidays. And I live in social housing, so and I think that we need an awful lot more social housing, because again, this is about public services being in public hands, and we need to really, you know, go back to the ethos of the commons and try and get that level of ownership. And the other thing that we're looking really to try and get the degrowth, as you've mentioned as well, we can't just keep on this trajectory of economic growth at all costs. And I'm seeing a lot of that language still within the legislative workloads that we have at the minute too. So that would be the 4 key areas about transport and mobility, housing, degrowth, and the naturalisation and greening of our public spaces again.
Yeah. We can't afford to. That's great. I mean, you can't afford to build back to business as usual. So yeah, we have to make the changes. Jonathan, broadly similar from your perspective in the University of England, Wales?
Yeah, broadly similar. I think the biggest, I guess, challenge is, right now, government is making decisions which are setting us on a path one way or the other, and we've got to change direction. And I do worry. Suddenly when it was announced that the COP has another date, and suddenly realised, that's what was it, November? I can't remember what it was. But it's been knocked right back, and we only had this 10-year window to turn everything around, and we're going to be another year and a half down that road. And I think challenging that fundamental economic model, which you touched on, Claire, is absolutely crucial to unlocking it. And it's like, it seems that in history there are these times of crisis. If you look at wars, are an obvious thing, like the Boer War, First World War, Second World War. Boer War, First World War, it was suddenly revealed the state of a lot of particularly working class men and the state of their health, and that was blown wide open, and there was no putting the genie back in the bottle, and that led inevitably to the formation of the NHS a number of years later, because something had to be done. In World War II, suddenly we realised that women could do men's jobs. Of course they could, and all the men were off to fight. Who knew? Of course. And then there was no going back. It fundamentally changed the workforce, and in a sense, a number of genies have been let out of the bottle in those ways around climate in this crisis. Suddenly we realised that we can all work a lot more from home than we thought we were able to. There are total, terrible challenges and terrible oppression from lockdown. But there's also people have seen there are new ways of working. We've seen, the air cleaned up, and so we suddenly get a taste of that. As you said, Claire, we've seen nature come back in. We've seen also the industry and business being able to adapt and change in a way perhaps we didn't realise they could. Everyone from Formula One, saying we can produce ventilators, through to the way restaurants and pubs and other people have altered their services to more delivery. And that gives me hope for the transition. And then I think that the intervention through the furlough scheme, underwriting 80% of wages, that shows the government can intervene and provide that safety net, which we do desperately need if we're going to transition and transform the economy. People have to be made secure. And I think people are starting to make the links between the welfare state and the action we need to take on transforming the economy and tackling the climate emergency. We've got to make huge changes. We have to make them. The Stern Review said very clearly, we have to make them sooner rather than later. Otherwise, we're storing up a wealth of expense and trouble for ourselves. So how do we kind of use those new kind of genies that are out of the bottle to kind of take us in that direction? But I do worry that there doesn't seem to be any structural transformation. And I think the big test is going to be when it comes to how we pay for this and what the narrative is around the economy. And we started to see that discussed, but I do worry about a return to that misguided model of the household budget being overspent, or the mortgage being overspent. Where I think the push point may be is over saying that for many, many years, a lot of people have made astronomical amounts of wealth off the fossil fuel economy on the one hand, and off our key workers on the other. So everyone who's made their money has done so off the doctors and nurses and the care workers who keep the workforce healthy. They've done it off all the teachers and the key workers in our schools who train our workforce. They've done it off all the bus drivers and the train drivers and everyone who moves our workforce around the country. All these people who are disregarded and thought as unimportant, suddenly in this crisis, we all realise we value them, we depend on them, they are vital, and we owe our world to them. Now, the question is, are we going to now heap all the financial burden on them, or are we going to take some of the wealth back from those who have made money off them for 40 years? And I think that's the key argument to dealing with the financial. And if we can make that argument, if we can win that argument, then we then have an argument for moving in a different economic direction. But if we have this return to austerity, then I think that really pulls the rug right under everything we're trying to do with the Green New Deal. Because of course, the Green New Deal, our argument is, if you borrow, it pays for itself in the long run. it generates tax revenue, it generates jobs, it transforms the economy, we make that transition. But if we can't win that argument, we're not going to get the investment and the structural change that we need to make. So, this is an absolute crossroads moment. The whole world genuinely hangs on this moment and how we respond to it economically. Discuss.
Yeah, I thought actually. Yeah, we could. There's a lot to unpack there, but I thought we could maybe turn to some of the questions actually, which I think you've touched on some of these areas already. But we had a number of questions that were submitted ahead of this event, and John was asking, how do we develop an economy which focuses less on growth and more on environmental protection and rehabilitation? I mean, I think from our perspective, there's a couple of different games in play at the moment. So the Scottish Government has set up a kind of green recovery group, which I sit on, which is meant to be looking at the climate change plan and things that we can do to meet the new targets by 2030. But at the same time, you've got an economic recovery group, which is considering, how we respond to COVID and how we build back. I'm not sure if it's about building back better, but certainly how Scottish Government wants to refloat the economy, where are its priorities for economic investment. And I think there's a danger that the two get lost. And unfortunately in Scotland, we've still got, as with every other government in the world, the primary objective of government being economic growth. I mean, they call it sustainable economic growth, so it's another different flavor of economic growth to all the others that exist. But nevertheless, it's still about economic growth, and it's how we kind of get out of that model. The Scottish Government's involved in the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, which has been pretty progressive. I mean, it should be, because it's got the New Zealand government in it and the Icelandic government in it, both of which, of course, have Greens in those administrations. But we're not necessarily seeing that translate into plans for a just transition for our oil and gas industry that takes workers with us. We're not necessarily seeing that translate into, a change in economic policy here. So, yeah, there are some big challenges for government, and I feel that the danger is that perhaps governments try and beef up the rhetoric on Green New Deal and green recovery, while at the same time, it's business as usual. And we had an interesting letter that was written today by Green campaigners to both Scottish and the UK governments, calling for INEOS, the big petrochemical plant, to not get a bailout. They're wanting a £500 million bailout. The guy who heads up INEOS, Jim Ratcliffe, is worth £18 billion. So it is a question now about which bits of the economy are we prioritising? How are we refloating the parts of the economy that are valuable, and what are the conditions that are applied to bailouts? Do INEOS have a plan for transition to net zero? I doubt it. And what are the social benefits we're getting through some of this bailout money to come? Those are some of my thoughts on it. I don't know about you guys. What?
I'd agree. Oh, sorry, Claire, you wanted to come in. I've got a bit of a delay on my feed.
Go ahead.
It's about safeguarding the jobs, but also saying, we're not going to bail you out, but we are going to safeguard the jobs. It's about showing that you care about people, but the industry needs to change. And I think public ownership might play a very key role in that, because that's, answer, instead of a bailout, you say, well, look, we'll take you over, we'll safeguard the jobs, and then we'll help them transition. And I think that might be a key argument. The other argument about drawing together the response to the crisis and tackling the climate and ecological emergency, I think, is to make the argument about resilience. And if we can build strong, resilient local economies with local supply chains that can withstand the winds that are inevitably the economic winds that are coming our way now, but will come our way in the future, because we might have to, we don't know how long we're going to have to live with coronavirus. We know that scientists are warning, because of our exploitation of nature, there may be other viruses on the way. And that's setting aside all the separate economic winds that this might trigger in terms of recessions and global downturns and depressions. So making that argument in terms of resilience makes it a very common sense, obvious, efficient way to move forward. And I think maybe we've got to reclaim some of that language that has traditionally been taken by those who are proponents of austerity. But sorry, Claire, go ahead.
Don't be sorry at all. It was, but the other thing is looking at, for me, I have little faith that politics, and you're speaking as a politician, it's maybe a bit of a silly one, but that politics can lead the change, that it can be the change. And from my experience so far, that level of political leadership only engages and will only sit up and take notice when there's a groundswell to tell them. So there's a real gap there between us being, as a political party, as Greens, and this is our ideology, this is our agenda, this is what we've been fighting and arguing for, that's grand. How do we then build that I think the real change that people have made in their own heads as well? How do we empower people to demand the change so that we start to see our politics becoming proactive rather than reactive? Or sorry, that's the way that it is at the minute. It always reacts to something, it's doing its business, and unless there is a big campaign, they're not going to create the change. And I think that certainly very, very true here for us. So it's about empowering people to demand that these changes, to demand that we have a non-regression, to demand that the environment is not something apart from us, but when we can fit this together, put forward a really solid plan, that people benefit from that, that it is about them at the heart of that, and both living together, and that the economic system, the economic models that we've had and the political backing to that has not been in their interests. And I was reading a report from Open Democracy, I think it was, who are even telling us now with the COVID finance packages that are being brought forward and out there, as much as 45% of the government COVID spending at the minute is going into the hands of private ownership yet again, and whether that be through private landlords and that rental money going back in, you know, so we're looking after that level, but not looking after people again. We're not building that security, and people are not silly. They're seeing this, they know it because they're feeling it, and they're filling our inboxes with it all for all those reasons. So I would like to see how we can be part of that facilitation of community empowerment. And an overarching model I don't think is going to work for all areas either. So you need to break it down into localized responses for localized plans to come forward. So it's about tapping into that Build Back Better campaign, really making that as strong as possible, as loud as possible, as demanding as possible, and doing everything we can to facilitate that at legislative and policy making levels. And that's what I see our responsibility being at the minute.
Yeah. So very much building better, but from the ground up, Clare, and I suppose what you're describing is a social movement as well, and making that as locally grounded as possible. I was going to ask you, because we had questions about renewable energy and you know, the development of that potential, and perhaps what you see as your kind of a local or regional Green New Deal for the areas where you live and work. You know, how do we make this real for people on the doorsteps? Because I don't like going on the doorsteps and saying, hello, you know, I've got a Green New Deal for Fife. I mean, that's not going to work. But, you know, we've got to talk about real jobs on the ground. So what kind of potentials, what things do you think need to happen in your areas to really, you know, get that Green New Deal working?
Energy is a huge one, and I think it has so much potential. And when we look at energy, not just as in a supply of oil, gas, or electricity, but within your home, your home is an energy unit as well. So if we can start to really engage people with things like retrofitting housing, existing housing stock. So our housing stock here, the majority of it is very, very poor and very old. So insulation would not be big in a lot of our housing stocks. So when we're talking about creating new jobs post-COVID, when we're talking about investment in a green economy, if we can, you know, not only just secure the right to people's housing, but that housing is sustainable and affordable. And a big part of the affordability will be the energy within it. So we can build green energy jobs and green energy infrastructure at the same time, you know, benefit the people economically within their own homes. The big one here again is an all-island energy infrastructure, north and south. So there's a big push on that, and a lot of work being done. And I do believe that the energy sector here in Northern Ireland are doing an awful lot of good work. So we set targets of 40% of our electricity had to come from renewable sources, and we were, there was a lot of sideswiping that at the time, that will never work. You can't get it, you can't get it. Well, we set a target and we set a date, and the date is up about now, and we've surpassed that. So I think we've hit 42%, if not it's 38, but somewhere we did it. But people were saying it was going to cost more, and it's back to what Jonathan said as well. It's about the long-term investment. Yes, there is an upfront cost, but there is a long-term gain. So even within those short few years, we have been able to meet that target. But not only that, but passing savings now onto consumers. So that renewable energy is now cheaper than it was coming from fossil fuel sources before. So the sector themselves know what's possible. They have the ideas, they have the resource, they have the people to drive this forward. They need the political will to allow them to continue. But then we have to look at community ownership models. And I remember speaking, again, I always go back to Scotland. I'm always jealous of initiatives that happen in Scotland. But looking at that community ownership way, so the triangle was a developer will see a piece of land, for example, and deal with the landowner to try and set up whether that be a windmill. But then there's the local community around that, and how do you get their buy-in? How do they get benefits from this? So it has to be a three-way cycle. And one village that I spoke to in Scotland, they when they got a wind farm, and it was quite a small one, the community were allowed to buy one of the wind turbines. And that was like a mortgage for their village, and talking to them how that played out, and they now all have ownership within that. They all now have free heating in their homes, and any sort of surplus that they get back in terms of revenue from that goes into community improvements for themselves. So it's about looking at those. So yes, the energy is a big thing, but when you break it down into the more local, there's a lot of responses that can be done there to benefit, whether that be through insulation to bring people's bills down, to long-term investment in renewable energy to then bring costs down as well, to that new way of being, to empower community wealth building, I suppose. So there's lots that can be done. I could go on and on for hours about all this, but
there's some amazing work happening. And I know that in England, Jonathan, I know that Councillor Andrew Cooper was trailblazing a lot of the energy efficiency programs 5-10 years ago, and we probably learned a lot from you on that. So what kind of themes are coming out of your kind of regional, local Green New Deals?
Yeah, I mean, Kirklees Council, yeah, that was amazing as a real model. I mean, I think the frustration is amongst many local authorities, they're not having the power, not feeling that they passed these climate emergency motions, and then all the citizens' assemblies were set up to go, and then COVID came along, and a lot of it is ground to a halt. So as you've been hitting at, Clare, I think that the mutual aid that's happened in local communities, and the local action, the people coming together around COVID, I think it's about harnessing that and crowdsourcing, if you like, the Green New Deal, crowdsourcing the future for our local communities. And expanding citizens' assemblies, beyond just the initial climate emergency, but to every area of local life. And so the Green New Deal is absolutely encompassing of everything. And it will require some legislative change from central government to allow local authorities to have the powers to do it. But just what Clare was saying, it reminded me of a couple of examples from my own local authority in Lambeth. There's a project, Brixton Solar, which is now repowering South London, and they recognise that in an era of low interest rates, people wanted a small return on their money, so they gave it to a solar scheme which put panels on top of the housing estate, created local jobs, local employment, local procurement, clean energy, cheap energy for those in the housing estate, and then the excess was put into a community fund, which then went into home insulation or whatever it might be. So just a win-win-win right across the board. Everyone won. It's common sense. And answer to your question, Mark, how do you sell this on the doorsteps? If you tell that story to anyone on the doorsteps, they go, well, of course. Why wouldn't you do it? Another one is the library of things we have in Lambeth. A bit of seed money from the local authority, a bit of charitable money as well. Liberating people from the need to own. Why does everyone need kind of camping gear that they might use once a year for a summer holiday, and then sits in their loft for a year, or gardening tools that or DIY tools they only need intermittently. They've set up a library of things, which takes the Victorian model of the library, but it's about stuff. And businesses market test their products for resilience, give them to the library of things they use multiple times. You feed the information back to the companies and they can improve their products. People in the community pay a small subscription for a year to be able to borrow this stuff and return it in a high density area with lots of people living in flats and small areas that don't have room for storage. It just makes sense. And I think using those examples, it's really powerful. And I really feel like the future is being written in our local communities right now. We've got to identify where that is and scale it up. And we can see that, if you can identify these examples, you can then make the case to central government, and there can be a real unleashing of energy and power. We saw it with the last Labour government, right at the end with their feed-in tariffs. If they created the right conditions for solar, everyone wanted to put solar panels on their roofs because it made financial sense. And so businesses started up, local authorities got on board, and it just made sense to do it. And jobs were created, and there was a big push. And then, of course, the Conservatives come along, cut the feed-in tariffs, pull the rug from right under the industry, and it all crumbles. So it shows that local authorities, local communities are ready and waiting. We've got to identify where the kind of pilots and models are, make the case to central government. If government create the conditions, you're away, and you can get change very, very rapidly and very, very quickly in a short space of time.
Yeah, I think that there's definitely a role for UK government to make those subsidies work for communities and make those subsidies work for jobs as well. And I guess my concern about the renewables revolution at the moment is that some of the communities in my area, particularly in Fife, perhaps haven't seen the jobs that they expected would come. You're talking about communities that historically have had a lot of engineering jobs in the oil and gas sector, creating offshore platforms, and the yards have been empty for a number of years. And there's disappointment when they see an offshore wind farm being built off the coast of Edinburgh, 10 miles away from Fife. And yet a lot of the work that's involved in building that wind farm, constructing the towers and the blades, is actually going to other countries like Belgium and Indonesia in some cases, when those jobs could be coming to the yards. So I think it's really important, Jonathan, that the UK government ensures that the subsidies that come to the renewable energy companies are actually conditional on the jobs coming to the communities that are supporting the development of these wind farms as well. So that's something that can be done at a top-down level, if you like. But I think what you've both been talking about in terms of regenerating our communities, some great examples of social enterprises now. We had a question earlier on about that came in about how do we rejuvenate our high streets. And what I'm seeing certainly in my town is more social enterprises coming into abandoned spaces. Unfortunately, we are seeing a lot of chains moving out of high streets now, but you've got some really creative social enterprises. One in my town called Made in Stirling, where it's a hub for local people who make things, who grow things to sell to the general public. So it's like a little local department store. But it's also a hub for other community groups, men's sheds to come in. There's a transition Stirling tool library next door as well. So exactly the kind of thing that's happening in Lambeth. And it's a great creative space. They've been operating a food hub there during the COVID crisis, and it's literally been the only thing that's been open in our high street during this time. So yeah, how we support social enterprise, how do we get that movement really strong? Because I think that's where a lot of the creative ideas are gonna come from. I can't believe this, but we're actually running out of time for this session and to change the world as well. John, I know you've got to go fairly soon, but I think we've perhaps got room for just maybe one other question. And we had a question come in from Alistair about what your thoughts are about COP26, and is the delay an opportunity or a threat to progress on climate change? We obviously had the news yesterday that COP26 will now be 1st to the 12th of November, not this year, but next year. All of us within the UK, we've all got a job to do to hold the UK government to account. And we're really looking forward to welcoming you to Glasgow in November next year. And we've got some exciting plans for that. But yeah, what are your thoughts about COP26 right now?
Well, I think I tweeted about it yesterday, and it's I think the answer to your question, is it a threat or an opportunity? Yes, is the answer. It's both, and it was a real blow, you know, I don't think there's any way of seeing it kind of as a setback, but then, you know, in a sense, all bets are off. Everything's up in the air. This is, you know, everything to play for, and what COVID has now thrown up. I mean, I worry, you know, the trajectory that we were on, you know, before COVID. You think about, it seems such a long time ago when we were talking about this at the general election in December and November last year, but we weren't, you know, we aren't on course to meet our 4th and 5th carbon budgets by 2050 as a country. You know, we're so far up, and that doesn't include aviation emissions or shipping emissions. We are so far behind, and we're not showing the leadership. We're still subsidising the fossil fuel industry to, you know, 12, 14 billion pounds a year. We're still going ahead with these dirty projects, and I mean, I know HS2 is controversial, and there's a division of opinion, but you know, you've seen with now people are rethinking the plans for airport expansion. You suddenly realise how linked HS2 was to airport expansion, and the phenomenal amounts of money that we spent on this rail link. Whereas, you know, if you had an integrated transport strategy. Let's remember, the UK doesn't really have a transport strategy still. HS2 just conjured up without a proper strategy in place. You know, if we electrified rail lines, if we opened up existing links, you know, went across the country rather than up and down, and invested in, you know, we really have an urgent issue to address public transport capacity right now. You know, if we are going to be socially distancing, as you say, people can't just get back in their cars. You know, we've got to get that capacity going in no uncertain terms, more than just one high-speed rail line. So, yeah, I think it means kind of thinking through everything, but my big concern is that we don't have the leadership in this country. You know, it's going to be so embarrassing to be hosting the COP even in November next year, with a country and leadership that doesn't get the climate and ecological emergency, seems to be completely self-interested, and it doesn't act well in the crisis, is devoid of vision, leadership and ideas. So I guess the pressure point here is to say, you're going to be so embarrassed next year if you don't up your game, if you don't do something, and make sure that what comes in place isn't greenwash. So, you know, the opportunity, and we've hesitated to use the word opportunity because it seems so inappropriate, but it's a moment that we've got to seize. I think both coming out of the pandemic and with COP, and COP needs to very much be the focus now, and maybe give us a little more space to bring about the change that we need to see.
Claire?
I'm going to take the real optimistic view here and see it as an opportunity. And I'll tell you why. It goes back to that empowering people to take control here, empowering people to be louder, bolder and better and make those demands. I mean, you look at environment in Northern Ireland, and we are an environmental disaster zone here. We have so many crises, we have just ongoing issues. For example, we are in Northern Ireland, the population, I think, is 3% of the UK population, yet we are producing 12% of the ammonia emissions. And our department's own figures are showing that 96% of that ammonia is coming from our agriculture sector, and that can be directly linked to going for growth strategies for the intensification of our agriculture, for how we're doing business. We've also got the Mootboy dump, which has been the biggest illegal dumping site ever found this side of Western Europe. We had the RHI scandal that we're still trying to deal with. That was meant to be a green energy scheme that was just completely mismanaged, mishandled, and that's in the courts and stuff at the minute as well. So there's just disaster after disaster. We're not meeting our air pollution, but all those disasters, we also have no environmental improvement plans. We have no environment bill. We have no measures coming through that are policy or legislative driven. So when I'm looking at the environment bill that's coming from Westminster at the minute, was drafted when Northern Ireland didn't even have an executive. So we weren't part of that conversation. And this piece of legislation has been drafted, just leaving Northern Ireland out. Basically, a few schedules, few clauses, quite a lot of them, but not with the context of where we're standing, no benchmarking and nothing solid there at all, and no regression clause even within that, no sunset clause to demand that we put these environment bills together within, you know, from where we're standing for ourselves. So with that and COVID on the top of it, with everything that we're talking about, trying to bring a Green New Deal, how do we empower people? Putting COP off within the UK, within Glasgow until next year, we'll have to take it as the big opportunity it could be, in terms of we spend the next lot of months empowering people to engage, to really clarify our messaging and our demands, and we take COP next year and we make sure that it is a marker that our governments will never forget.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think it
Can
could be.
I just say, Mark, I've been so inspired, Claire, by your hope and optimism. Thank you so much, genuinely, because I'm feeling a little bit down at the moment. And hearing you talk, it's been really great. And I love your. My takeaway from this will be the creation of a movement to build back better. I think that's it for me. It's like, can we show the leadership in that movement? Can we be the political wing of that movement? Can we build that movement for change? Thank you.
Facilitators where we stand 100%, and get our membership and our constituency groups and our activists all engaged within that, and local plans for local people in local communities that will benefit them, and we are the facilitators for that change at whatever level that we're either elected or active in.
Yeah, it's got to happen. And I think we can bring a lot of that energy to COP26 in Glasgow next year. I mean, you know, we've got some great plans. So we're going to be organising a green hub, and we've been talking to European Green parties about that. So that'll be a space where we can come and share the successes around Europe. You know, we've got elected Greens running cities and councils and countries. So, and we can feed into those social movements as well and really tell an amazing story. There's also been discussion about an online hub, so there'll be lots of activism happening. And so I think some really good moments as well in the run up to COP. So there'll be the G7 meeting, the G20 meeting. So there'll be really key points, I think, where we can mobilize those social movements and really drive for that change. Okay, we're out of time. I can't believe this. We should do this more often. I think particularly in the run up to, and it's been an absolute delight to speak to you both today. And it's funny, isn't it, with this crisis, how it's actually kind of brought people closer together. I mean, I know that that's what everybody says, but it's definitely bringing the Green parties closer together. So, yeah, thanks very much for coming today. One last plug from me, which is please, you know, if you're viewing this anywhere within the UK or even outside the UK, join a Green party and donate to Green parties as well, and get involved in those social movements that Claire and Jonathan were talking about. Now is the time for that activism. COVID's kind of put some of our fundraising back a little bit in the Scottish Greens. So we are looking really in the months to come, as we start to come out of lockdown, to really build towards our really important Holyrood elections in 2021. And then I know, Jonathan, you've got council elections next year in England and Wales, maybe. I think you've always got council elections on most years. And you'll have your own you know, political moments to build for as well, Clare, in Ireland. So thanks very much for coming and listening in. And remember, this is a regular Green Live event. It happens every Friday at 2 p.m. And we look forward to joining you soon. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.